Hey everybody, it's Mark Schultz here, and we're going live here, and we're doing a really interesting thing today. We are actually going live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and we actually are connecting up with our Clubhouse room. And so it's something new, and one of the reasons that I'm doing it is we're actually trying to bring across our audience from LinkedIn into Clubhouse. And so we're actually going to be able to connect up some of our audio questions that we're going to take on digital transformation with LinkedIn and YouTube and some of the other places. So for those of you that are out there in Clubhouse today, you just need to be aware that this room is actually being broadcast live right now across LinkedIn. And so there actually is a recording going on. So we just have to give a disclaimer on Clubhouse that that's happening. But today we're going to talk about digital transformation in aviation aerospace. And I welcome you to check in on LinkedIn and let me know where you're watching from. I have people that are jumping on right now for different platforms. They're coming on. I have Marcy Simpson with Nycote, and I also have some people on Clubhouse that are coming in. And it's a little bit complicated to do this, and so I'm really hoping that this is actually going to work. Sounds like it is, and I'm looking forward to pulling this together. But today we're going to talk about digital transformation. I have an expert that I'm going to bring on, Thanos Capra-Denise, and he is actually the CEO of Aerosoft Systems, and he has many, many years in digital transformation. We're actually going to bring that conversation together. And those of you in the audience, you're going to have an opportunity to be able to ask audio questions. Those of you that are watching on LinkedIn Live, you are going to have an opportunity to be able to ask questions, in the comments. And so check in the comments. Let me know where you are. And we are going to kick off this fun session. Last week, I actually tried to do it, and we had a problem with the audio, and I had to drop the Clubhouse. And so I hope that we actually don't end up doing that again. But it should be a lot of fun. So without any further conversation here, I'm going to go ahead and bring in my guest speaker today, and it's Thanos. Thanos, how you doing today?
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on which time zone you are.
Yeah, exactly. I am in the Pacific time zone, and Thanos is on Eastern time zone. Thanks for joining us. Thanos, I see you're all bundled up in your vest there. Is it cold there where you are today?
Well, outside it's cold, but the reason I'm wearing my vest is actually we are in essentially lockdown mode, and only 2 or 3 senior managers are in the office, and the entire temperature is set up to support about 20 people in our office, and with only 2, it actually is pretty cold indoors.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, exactly. All right. Okay, hey, listen, for those of you that are watching today, we are going to have a conversation on digital transformation and how it actually applies in aviation aerospace. And the first thing I wanted to start off by telling people out there today is, hey, by the way, continue to check in with us in the comments. We are watching the comments here, and we are going to take questions both through the comments on our LinkedIn platform, as well as we're going to take some audio discussions from people out there in the Clubhouse audience. And so it should be pretty interesting. Technologically, I haven't ever made it work before, so we're hoping that this actually works today. But if you would, help us out and share the broadcast. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a share button, and you can get the broadcast out to people out there. And also, if you have comments, drop them into the box, and I can actually throw them up on the screen. So, like, for example, I have Marcy Simpson, who she's with the CEO and president of Nycote Coatings, and she says, thanks for connecting the 2 platforms. And as you can see, we can bring this stuff up on the screen. And I appreciate you checking in from Los Angeles, Marcy. And anybody else that's out there, check in and let us know where you're coming to us from. But hey, where I wanted to start this discussion today with Thanos was regarding digital transformation. Thanos, when we talk about digital transformation outside of the aviation industry, a lot of times there's some confusion because people don't know exactly what digital transformation means as much. There's people that do in aviation, but it isn't as common of a term as it is outside of aviation. So, Thanos, what are we talking about when we say digital transformation with respect to the aviation industry?
Well, a lot of people use some words interchangeably, and fundamentally they have different meanings. For example, you read articles where people talk about electronic data, right? Well, we've had electronic data for forever. I mean, an MS Word document is electronic, a frame maker is, a PDF is. You got electronic data on a CD and you put it in a drive. I think that when we're talking about digital transformation is we're referring to going to a different level of standards-based structured content that not only can be shared between producers, manufacturers, and airlines, but then to be further manipulated at the airlines in an efficient manner so that it can serve all the way through the maintenance process and in the flight's operations in reauthoring and training manuals and so on environments.
So Thanos, so what you're pointing out though is that there's a big difference between just having electronic data and actually having something that is actually digital or structured or intelligent, or a big difference between the two. Like we have PDF documents which represent electronic, but it doesn't mean that it's intelligent, for example, right?
Well, yes. So when we say digital transformation, we mean moving to standards that support structure, that support reusability, that support very efficient communications, let's say from centralized databases to mobility devices and so on and so forth. Those are very important elements. Yes, you can send PDF large volumes to a mobility device, but you can't efficiently have a revision model where that device gets updated on the basis of how the centralized documents get updated efficiently and so on and so forth. I mean,
yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly. So we begin to have advanced capabilities that we don't have when we have, like a scanned image or a PDF image of a paper or of a page. Hey, Thanos, we continue to have more people joining us. Here we have visitors. Desiree, thanks for joining us from San Antonio, and we have Simon Barker. He always is a great follower, from the UK. Thanks for joining, Simon. And we also have some visitors from India. We have Natita, airport director. From India. We usually have people that join us from all around the world. If you're out there watching, hey, just drop a comment here into the comment box, and we'd love to know where you're coming from. And we are going to get to questions in just a few minutes, and so you'll want to jump in and have the opportunity to be able to ask some questions. But Thanos, so once we start moving toward the idea of digital and more intelligent content, so it has more capability that exists. We're going to get to talking about why that is possible in a little bit. But the second major question that I have for you is that what are some of the major applications of more intelligent data? Give me the difference between something that's a non-intelligent application of electronic data and an intelligent application of electronic data. What's the difference between the two?
Well, before I jump into it, I want to take a sidebar that links my previous comments to what I'm about to say. Okay. When we talk about, let's say, electronic and PDF and so on, and then migrating to mobility platforms and or browser-based information, there is a subject that is very dear to my heart, and that's user interface. The PDF world was literally a portable, print format. So it was really an image of the paper world. So whatever user interface was appropriate for the paper world, more or less, is identical in the way it's used on a PDF sort of a document or content. However, when that's why you have, for example, very popular form applications. The paper form how to use to fill, and then you have fields, and then in a PDF form, and people end up filling that content. So that's one particular way of continuing to use exactly the same user interface. In our world, when we're talking about having as much content as possible in one screen, either for the purposes of reading and or purposes of entering additional information, and when that screen becomes a mobility device, the user interface and what I call the real estate becomes very, very important. So what made a lot of sense in a paper world, those of you who are in aviation will know what a traditional job card looked like, with, let's say, 2 columns of a mechanic and an inspector signing them off and so on and so forth. That format, that look, makes no sense whatsoever on a mobility device, because you're eating up a lot of the screen for nothing. You can achieve sign-off with a single tick based on the credentials of the person that's signing it, and behind it you're carrying a digital signature, and so on and so forth. So I'm addressing one simple thing. So in answering your question, I gave you one example of what I call intelligent information. Intelligent information is not just a manual that has links from one task to the other, or from one illustration to a vendor list and so on, but also an application that allows you to capture input as the job card, let's say, is being used in production, and that information is very important because it needs to go back into, let's say, an MRO system and show compliance and or movement of a part which relates to inventories and so on and so forth. So that is part of what we're calling an intelligent sort of application, as opposed to merely navigating manuals and jumping from screen to screen, linking references and so on. Those are all very important characteristics, and all those need to remain, but we're talking about going a level beyond that.
Yeah. So Thanos, if I looked at specifically some of the types and ways that intelligent data is used within the aviation industry today. So you mentioned a couple of them. You talked a little bit about maybe task cards and other systems. And so we all know that we have MRO systems, or we have configuration control systems, records of systems of record. We have content manuals, we have maintenance programs, we have electronic task cards, we have records, we have all sorts of things across the value stream of business processes that can utilize electronic. Okay, is that if we start to move to a world where we want for there to be more capability that comes from some of these systems and solutions, and better efficiency and higher performance, okay, where are some of the main areas that we can focus on to be able to create more intelligent data? Where does a smart data make a difference over having like a scanned image of a dirty fingerprint piece of paper?
Well, I address the area of job cards or task cards, which are very critical. It's the core of what airlines require in order to complete the maintenance and to remain compliant and to have serviceable aircraft, and to also manage control costs, which is an incredibly important dimension in airline operations. Other areas where you need intelligence is in complex flight operations manuals, in navigating, let's say, through fault trees in an FCOM. You require that you can use intelligent data in, let's say, importing initial aircraft configuration and parts, and behind it to drive, let's say, the needs for provisioning packages and inventory and so on and so forth. So the list of applications is very, very it's very rich.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of different places that we can begin to apply that. Thanos, I like to, as we have our conversations, is to bring in people from the audience, just to bring their questions in and address those as we go, rather than like waiting to the end. And Simon Barker, who watches a lot of our broadcasts here, and I really appreciate that, Simon. And thanks for doing that. But he has a question here real quick, which says, are we seeing a speed up of digital transformation, during the pandemic, or are people going slow in a shutdown? What are you actually seeing, out there?
Well, we know there was a lot, because 2019 was a very, very good year for the airline industry. A lot of initiatives started at the end of 2019 with projects or RFIs or RFPs in the first quarter of 2020. That came to a scorching halt across the industry for the obvious reasons that you know. However, what we've seen is that things have changed. In the last quarter of 2020, and certainly in the beginning of this year, the people that were out in various modes of projects a year ago, they're initiating and they're acting on those projects, number one. Number two is the people that were actually in progress and we have customers that are in progress of that transformation, they actually continue doing the work, even though some of them would go to 80% capacity of their in-house resources and so on. They continue work because they know they have to move away from the technology that was there in 2019 to the technology that they need in 2021 and going forward, because they're changing their cost structures, they're renewing their fleets, and so on and so forth. So
yeah, I've
I
actually
can tell you
seen,
we've been as busy in 2020 as we've been in 19, and we project additional busyness, I call it, in 2021.
yeah, no, that's really good to hear that, because I know that initially we were all really concerned last year on what would happen, and I know there were a lot of people that put projects on hold. And so, Simon, to answer your question, is that we all know that there were airlines and MROs that put projects on hold. But as the year continued, we saw people taking, in my opinion, two positions. Okay. And there's maybe three, but two major positions. People either said, we're going to wait and we're going to see what happens. We're going to cut costs. We're going to just wait and see where we need to go. And then I also saw people that were in a position to be able to leverage this time to be able to begin to grow some of their digital and some of their digital transformation. And I know companies, I know Thanos, I know Aerosoft has done really well over the last year. I know other companies that have continued to grow, over 2020, and definitely in the last couple of months of 2020 and into 2021. I have seen more RFPs coming out in the last 4 months, I would say, than I did in the last 10 months. So we know, Simon, to answer your question specifically, there definitely has been some growth, some increased momentum in digital transformation. No question about that. Okay. Hey, listen, there was another question that was brought up in the audience, Thanos, that I wanted to maybe start to drill down into. Somebody was asking about, what about S1000D, XML, and I'll add into that iSpec 2200. We throw around some of these things that maybe not everybody is completely familiar with, but if you're involved in digital implementation in aviation aerospace, you know what those specifications are, right? But before we start and dig into maybe having a little bit of conversation about the importance of structured data, can we just talk a little bit about what's the difference between S1000D, iSpec 2200, XML, and we don't need to have a long, dialogue and discussion about it. But I want to orient people with some of the terms we're using, so that as we are talking about them right now, that they know what they mean. So, Thanos, early ATA 100 standards were standards for digital data in the industry. Then it evolved into what after that?
Well, let me see. ATA 100. Those of you that are in aviation, ATA 100 was the paper standard that brought out the AMTOS codes. Then we had Spec 2100, which was essentially an effort to create a digital version of the ATA 100 spec. And then iSpec 2200, and both Spec 2100 and iSpec 2200 are SGML-based data delivery standards from the OEM to the airlines. Okay. S1000D has its roots in military environments and aircraft and other weapon systems and so on. And it ultimately became the next generation digital standard for aviation. Having said that, today, if we assume there are around 18,000 or thereabouts commercial aircraft, there is only 3 aircraft types in commercial aviation that are S1000D based. The 787, which is partially actually iSpec 2200, the Airbus 350, and the initially Bombardier C series, which is now known as the A220. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, the other difference, even amongst those 3 aircraft, which today are about 1,500 out of the 18,000 flying, and they may be 2,500 in a year or two, is that those 3 aircraft are at very different levels of the S1000D standard, which require substantially different systems to manage and go forward with. But both. So it's not an issue of S1000D versus iSpec. The world of aviation has to live for a very long time with iSpec 2200 and S1000D. Okay.
Okay.
Brand new aircraft today, the 37 Max, the Airbus Neos, and so on are coming off the line. They're new aircraft, and they are still being produced according to ISPEC 2200. And there are very good reasons, but I don't want to go in there. Okay.
Yeah. But the reality is that we have a lot of different aircraft types out there in the industry. We have a lot of different ages of them. They've evolved over time. And you and I both know that the day we get a phone, the technology is outdated the day we buy it. And so technology continues to move, more rapidly out there today. And so we have airplanes that are 20, 30 years old, and we have data that's 20, 30 years old. And so we have different standards that evolved over time. And so one of the biggest challenges that, Thanos, that I see that we have out there is the ability to be able to run a business that has mixed fleets and different types of data. And so as we begin to talk about the value in moving into digital transformation, how does this complexity of structured and unstructured data, kind of fit together? Is it really valuable? Is it not valuable? So I wanted to start to break this down a little bit and say, Thanos, is it number one, is it, do we have to operate in a world where we have a mixture of structured and unstructured data?
It's absolutely inevitable because, first of all, the unstructured data is the legacy, both in terms of the aircraft types and models that the airline used to operate. By the way, an aircraft were built for 20-year life, and we found that many of them live 40 years, right? So when an aircraft gets manufactured and designed and goes out the door, the standard by which its documentation is provided is cast at that time. And never through the life of the aircraft is that standard changed, right? So that's the other important thing to keep in mind. So when an aircraft is issued today, according to a given standard, and that aircraft lives 20 to 30 years, it's that standard that will be documented by. It's not going to, halfway through its life, it's going to change. A lot of people in the early days were talking about, well, we should convert all ISPEC to S1000D, and you got the brakes put on by the major manufacturers. Said, no way. Because of the costs involved. Those are the issues. Okay, so non-structured content is absolutely part of the legacy of the airline. They have typically written their job cards either in Microsoft or FrameMaker, and or done cut and paste from PDF source documents. Right? They got the data on a CD-ROM. They viewed it on the screen, they selected the PDF, and they copied it into their job cards. Then they enriched the job cards according to what makes sense for them in combining MPD, MRB content, in satisfying their specific business processes and efficiencies and so on. So they have huge investments in many cases in what I call combined legacy and trying to move to a structured world. So any system or solution has to accommodate, without a doubt, the PDF world. It has to accommodate the SGML world. That SGML world certainly will be authored and managed in an XML environment. And in moving forward, the S1000D world, depending on at the range of aircraft that you're operating. If you're a regional carrier, unless you start using A220s, you will not need S1000D. You could be a mainline carrier. The Southwests and the WestJets of the world are 737 and Q400 based. They do not need, and they will not need in my lifetime, S1000D, because those aircraft continue being published or produced with documentation that is based on ISPEC 2200.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Thanos, so we've established that we have aircraft that are over a broad period of time. We've established that we're going to have mixtures and types of data. So, we talked a little bit about the value of having structured data. And again, when I continue to use the term structured data, for those of you out there listening, I'm talking about data that's intelligent. I'm talking about data that's not an image. Back in the olden days, when we said we want to move to putting data from text into a database, we said we'll be able to have richer functionality because it's not a text flat file, it's in a database. All right. And then we added lots of additional capability and, advanced metadata and attributes and, abilities to be able to search, find, sort, retrieve data, interface with APIs. All those things came from more advanced data. And so we know that we have to have smarter, more intelligent data. But if I have smarter, more intelligent data, Thanos, what can I do with it? Why is it important for me to move to a more intelligent data set?
Well, you made a very good point when you raised metadata, for example. In the PDF world, all you see is all the data. In a structured content world, let's XML based and so on, you not only have the data that you actually see, but you have data behind it that can capture anything from why a piece of information changed, when did it change, how many people access it, even if they're viewing it on an IETP, like what was the change authority, and so on and so forth. It can all live behind that data, as opposed to just the XSLT transformed and displayed in a browser or on a mobility platform version of the data. That allows you to search that data with typical database tools and find out all sorts of information and relationships behind it.
Okay, so Thanos, we begin to start to uncover some of the advantages and value in using digital data. I have a question that came up by somebody. I want to throw it up on the screen. See how you would answer this. The question comes from Lou Lupa, and he says, as part of a digital transformation strategy, how important is an interactive electronic technical publication? Okay, and how important is like condition-based maintenance? Plus a strategy. So Thanos, you have a lot of experience in being able to publish IETPs. All right. Is that how important is it to have an IETP as opposed to maybe a PDF based manual that came from the manufacturer? What's the difference?
A PDF based manual can in itself have a certain amount of intelligence. Some operators have their own browser or presentation tools that they ship along with the PDF content. And let's say that PDF content has capabilities of linking content from within a manual or sometimes even across manuals. And they also offer services where, for example, TRs and so on can be inserted as they're being generated by the OEM. But an IETP typically gets generated from an XML source. It has all the information vis-a-vis links and so on and so forth, but it has the capability where it can validate that all those links work. Okay, because there's nothing worse in digital electronic data that to push a link and then find out it doesn't exist because it's jumping you to nowhere. Yeah. And that whatever it's sending you could be a very critical piece of information that the mechanic or planner or whatever or engineer may require at that point in time. So an IETP is a means of displaying the information. In itself, it's not particular. You have capabilities in IETPs like, for example, you may be able to annotate sometimes. Let's say you're viewing it and you notice either a discrepancy in the information you see relative to the real world when you're fixing the manual, or you want to, as I said earlier, you want to find out who is accessing which part of the IETP and so on and so forth. So it's essential element whether you're looking on a browser or you ship the whole manual set on a mobility platform.
So we can get a lot more value, out of doing it. And Thanos, I wanted to bring up maybe one thing is that in the past you've talked to me a little bit about the complexity in some manufacturer manuals in resolving effectivity. And I know that when you're using intelligent structured data, that many times that you have an easier time of doing that. Can you talk to us a little bit about how?
Well, I wanted to say something about the second part of that question, and
okay,
that's condition-based maintenance. Now, condition-based maintenance is a very, very powerful concept. However, all aircraft that are built by MSG3 are based on the concept of look, and if it's broken, replace it, or replace it anyways because its time is up, and take it to a bench test and refurbish it and put it on the shelf for reuse. Okay, condition-based maintenance depends on onboard systems that will report partial behavior deviation of the item outside its expected range, and that alerts you, and then you just go and you deal with the item that's complaining and being slightly outside its normal operation, and you fix that. There are no commercial aircraft that are based strictly on condition-based maintenance. I believe the F-35 is the Joint Strike aircraft is based on a condition-based maintenance program. Strictly. Okay? So that's one issue.
Okay.
So you had a question. Go back to it if you like.
Well, no, I just thought that that along this lines of having IETPs having the greatest amount of functionality, you've told me that there are problems in usability of data because of the complexity of effectivities, for example.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I think you've done some things to resolve some of that, haven't you?
Yeah, the effectivity and the revision model are the two biggest challenges, and systems are built to, in some ways, what I call cover up for some of the wrong fundamental designs in ISPEC 2200. On the one hand, I'm telling you ISPEC 2200 is here to stay. On the other hand, I'm telling you that it had some core challenges. But effectivity is a very important part. Depending on the manufacturer, the digital data that they supply may be specific to the range of tails you have leased or purchased, and some other ones will send you the information for the entire tails that have been manufactured on that model. When a mechanic is dealing with a particular aircraft in the hangar, they really want to know the information that pertains to that tail. And more importantly, they want to look at the information as it relates pre or post service bulletin. Now, here is one of the dramatic jumps. In a PDF manual, you have to show everything. You don't get a choice to hide and show content. In an intelligent content that can dynamically be generated from an XML source, while the XML source contains all the content, the HTML that you actually display on a screen can be only this tail related information, or only this tail before an SB and after an SB implementation. And that's critical capability that can only be done when the interactive electronic technical publication is intelligent, like I said.
Yeah. Now,
the revision model is also complex because you get some manufacturers will send you only every 90 days. Some other ones will send you every 30 days a minor revision, and then every 90 days a major revision. And there will be TRs in between. Some of the TRs will be in PDF. Some will be in SGML. They all have to be dovetailed, and they have to be managed against the airline specific content, legacy content that may be there, and so on. So
yeah. So Thanos, is it we all know that it ends up being the ultimate responsibility of the maintenance, the mechanic, to ensure that he's doing maintenance according to manufacturers, procedures. Okay. However, when the ability to be able to resolve that becomes complicated and very difficult, okay, then it lends itself to inefficiencies, the possibility of errors and omissions and different things like that. And so people ask me, frequently is that what's the impact of using some of those advanced features like that? Okay, well, we've seen the ability to be able to dramatically decrease, errors. We've seen the ability to make it easier for someone to comply. All right, and we've also seen for the ability for there to be a significant more efficiency, not only in resolving what the right applicable procedures are, but the actual execution of those. And so, in the end, I don't ever like to say, hey, it creates more safety. I want to give the reasons why. But the reality is that if we make it easier for someone to do the right job, then they're going to operate in a more, they're having less chance of doing something wrong. Okay. And so by having structured intelligent data, we now have the ability to be able to provide them with customized specific data to their needs and what they're actually doing. And so I think that, that captures a lot of what you just said, doesn't it?
Yeah, customized and correct is what it's all about, right? In ISPEC, you can have effectivity statements that are half a page long because of the different production cuts. An aircraft that's got 1,500 tails that has been produced, it can have ranges where on aircraft, 1 through 197, something applies, and then on the other ones it doesn't, and so on and so forth, right? That is very difficult for a human to actually read and understand and decide whether now on the aircraft that is just pulled in, shall I do this task or not? A system that actually parses that at the database end and shows them only the effective task is very important. And that's the other point I made, is the pre or post SB. Let's say you have 300 regional aircraft in your fleet, and there is one service bulletin that's issued. The engineering department said it's got to be applied. Yeah, but it'll take about 3 months to push that service bulletin through the entire fleet. And yet regional aircraft will come in every night for some checks and some partial phase day checks. Well, it's very important to know that the tail that's pulled in tonight is pre-SB versus the other one is post-SB in how you deal with a task around a similar MPD requirement. So those are the issues that intelligent data can sort behind the lines and show you only the content you got to be dealing with as the mechanic.
Now, one of the things I've seen and experienced, Thanos, is that not every manufacturer produces the same, kind of effectivity data. Like, for example, when I was at Boeing, not always, but frequently they would produce a manual for an operator, which was effectivity specific, for that operator or for those tail numbers. Now, there are other operators, there are other manufacturers, okay, that produce a generic document, which means that it applies to every single airplane that was ever made. And so that's where some of the importance of the intelligent data and the effectivity filtering comes in, is that when you have such complex data sets that exist.
And then, for example, if we take Boeing and Airbus, Boeing, for their I-spec aircraft, produced an MTC, a maintenance task card manual, right? Which is the starting point the airlines begin before they start making their own customizations. Airbus doesn't. Airbus issues you the MPD and the AMM. And the MPD has the AMTOS codes and the tasks that apply to each MPD line item. And you need to have a system that'll push the button and generate the generic task card manual just to start with. And then you can go further, customize it to your business processes and so on and so forth. Yeah. That is possible with intelligent data. That is not possible playing it against PDFs and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Thanos, I want to answer a couple more questions that have come up. One of them, which I want to just address and just get your feedback on. I have some opinion on this, but one of our viewers out there today is Tim Alden, and he's actually with Rusada. And he asked a question about the ownership of source data. And so I know I've had this be asked over the years many, many times, is that if someone is using a content management system and they receive data from a manufacturer, for example, and they make changes and then they repurpose that, I know that product support agreements are different, and I have a comment on that, but I wanted to know what your experience has been with people making changes and modifications and repurposing their operator data for use in maintaining their fleets. What's been your experience in that, yourself?
The FSDO certifies the operator based on the documentation that's available at the hands of the mechanic, which includes the OEM content, plus supplements, plus amendments that the airline believes are essential to provide to the mechanic. And they also certify the maintenance process and procedure based on the job cards that are presented to the mechanic, which are generated by the airline according to what they want. So the responsibility and the certification is at the hands of the airline. So many times that's my experience.
Yeah. But many times though, Thanos, I think that the angle that, I don't know for sure, but I think the angle that might be being asked here is that sometimes there's questions about the authority of using the data. All right. And so I just want to comment on that. I have people ask me that all the time, is that, your product support agreement from the manufacturer defines who can use the data and who has to pay for it and who can reuse it and that type of thing. And there's always been questions about the operator versus a first tier operator or second tier operator, and how does the product support agreement apply, and what about the MROs? And the best thing I can say is that it's complex, all right? And it really depends upon the aircraft manufacturer and how their product support agreements are on whether you have, what rights you have to use the data and make changes and repurpose them. But in general, I'm going to say in general, okay, if you're an original first-tier operator of an aircraft and you have a product support agreement with revision service with the manufacturer, you have the rights to use that data, make changes, and republish it for maintaining your own airplanes. And in most cases, not all, but in most cases, you have the authority to give that to an MRO or the maintainer of your aircraft, and they can use that data in order to be able to maintain your airplanes, okay? But I do know that OEMs charge MROs for the use of data when they're using data to, in general, maintain aircraft, out there in the industry for their MRO. And so the best way I can answer this question, is that it really depends upon the product support agreement, and it really depends upon the airline and the operator. And I've seen so many different variations of that it's difficult to answer that question wholesale. But in general, if you are receiving revision service from a manufacturer, you are within your rights to make changes to that to meet your maintenance program and to be able to maintain your airplane according to that documentation that you've used and changed. I mean, would you agree with that, Thanos?
Well, I know as a technology supplier, we certainly had to be included in our customer's agreement with their OEM that once they receive the data, we get to receive it so we can import it and test it and whatever with our system and so on. But it would make no sense whatsoever for the airline to buy SGML or XML service if the intent was not to customize it, to dovetail into it their own changes and to deploy it on their favorite various devices and platforms and so on. With respect to, let's say you're an airline and you want to send XML job cards, for example, they're your job cards anyways. The fact that you used part of the OEM content to compose them, and then they're in XML, and you sending them to your favorite service center to get the aircraft maintained, I don't see why that would be an issue. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I'm a technologist. I'm not a lawyer.
Yep. No, I understand. And like I said, I've seen a lot of different product support agreements, and so it's difficult to understand that wholesale. But there are some complexities in that, and I understand that. But in general, the manufacturers, have to allow you to be able to customize your information, your data, to be able to meet your conditions in your environment and your maintenance program. So in general, the utilization of that data and repurposing of it, is allowed. But again, you have to go back and look at a product support agreement.
Well, not only, I mean, if I take that question to S1000D, it makes no sense whatsoever. Like, what are you going to do with the S1000D database that you receive if you don't have a CMS system with style sheets that actually presents it in a human consumable form? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe I'm not understanding the question.
That in itself should answer the question. Right there. You're right. It's very right. Hey, Thanos, we've been going for about a little over 45 minutes right now. And usually, I like to keep our conversations to about that amount of time. But what I wanted to tell people out there, we've had a lot of really good engagement, a lot of good questions. But Thanos and I have made a plan here where we're going to talk about digital transformation throughout the month of March. And actually at the same time, which is we went live at about 10:30 Pacific time, 1:30 Eastern time. We're going to do that. It's Tuesday. We're actually going to do that for the next 4 weeks and continue this conversation. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to invite all of you, any interested parties out there, to join us for the next 4 weeks to continue this conversation, because I have been passionate my entire career about helping people to go digital. And, Thanos has a wealth of experience in this space. And Thanos, how many years have you been involved in digital data in the aviation industry today?
Oh, it's embarrassing, but since 1992. January 6th, to be precise.
There just aren't a lot of people out there today that are in the industry that have that kind of depth of experience. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to, honor my desires and your desires of helping people to be successful, out there in the implementation of digital. I know it's a passion of yours. It's a passion of mine. And so Thanos and I have committed for the next month, to have this conversation and continue it with people on LinkedIn. And so I wanted to invite you to join us again next week on Tuesday at 10:30 Pacific time and 1:30 Eastern time, where we're going to continue these conversations. Let me tell you where we're going to go next. We're going to dig into a little bit more details of implementations of structured data, what kind of applications are using structured data, and ultimately, really, what are the business problems that are being solved by the digital transformation in the aviation industry? Because we want for business problems to be solved and for businesses to be successful. If you're an airline, if you're an MRO, if you're a software provider, if you're business jet operator, if you're in defense, or if you're in commercial or business jets, I think this conversation is going to apply to you because there's a significant proliferation of digital data right now. People have found that we are now able to implement digital data more than ever before. And so we're going to try to leverage this opportunity and help people to be successful in this space. Thanos, I wanted to thank you for the conversation today, and I really appreciate you bringing in your knowledge and expertise, and we're going to continue it in future weeks. So there's a question here that somebody just asked me, Lou. He said, how can I get a reminder of the event? Do we send calendar invites? We don't. One of the challenges with LinkedIn Live is it goes live and you get an alert. If you follow my profile, my LinkedIn profile, you will get an alert, and I will send out some broadcast messages reminding people that we're going to do this. But just the way that live broadcasts work is that there's no way for me to tell you, in advance that it's happening other than for you to put it on your calendar and just to be aware that it's going to happen. But thanks for the question, Lou. And maybe in the future we can figure that out more, but you should get an alert that we've gone live, at that time. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. And Thanos, your knowledge is great, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. So I'm going to sign off with people today. Thanks, Thanos. I appreciate you being here.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. And fair winds and following seas to you. And I want to thank you guys for joining us today and for being part of this conversation, taking paper to digital.